To begin with, Traffic is one of the most well-directed movies I've ever seen. Steven Soderbergh won the Best Director Oscar for it for the year 2000, and Traffic has a very well-written and powerful screenplay, which Steven Soderbergh translated onto the screen really well. It has very good intertwining character storylines, and I've always loved it when a story could do that successfully. You can really see how the decisions of some characters affect the lives of other characters. I love the cinematography style, the rawness of it, and the shaky shoulder-mounted cameras and the heavily color-paletted parts. It's just, the cinematography is great. I really like it a lot. And Traffic isn't quite a super indie movie or anything, but not enough people know about it because it's one of the best of the decade, and it's one of the most well-directed movies I've ever seen. The Pianist is one of the best Holocaust films yet made. I would put it second to Schindler's List, but it's definitely way up there. Adrian Brody, in a stunning Oscar-winning performance, he plays the real-life character Władysław Szpilman. And Szpilman was one of the best concert pianists in the world in his youth, but he also happened to be a Jew living in Warsaw, Poland in the outbreak of World War II. The film does a good job of showing you the chaos and uncertainty before the war, and it shows you the Nazi occupation and the walls being built up. And you see some brutal Nazi violence and the tragic separations that occur. And the Pianist follows Szpilman's experience and how he survived that entire ordeal. It's a stunning film, very dramatic and really well directed, and it's definitely one of the best Holocaust films yet. Spirited Away is an adventure in every sense of the word. It was made by beloved Japanese animated filmmaker Hayao Miyazaki, and it's about a little girl who, right after moving, she gets lost in the woods, and she ends up in a magical world very different from her own. And she has to find her way around and figure things out. And it's just such an adventure because of how unpredictable it is. The people and the creatures she meets and the places she goes, they're all so fantastical, and it's all strange, but strange in a very good and interesting way. It's just captivating. Of course, the animation is beautiful. And Joe Hisaishi does the music for the Hayao Miyazaki movies, and Joe Hisaishi's soundtrack for Spirited Away is truly an epic soundtrack. Spirited Away is nothing short of an animated adventure. Mystic River is a very intense and dark drama that takes place in Boston, and it's about three childhood friends who grew up together and they had very different occupations as adults. And then a murder occurs in one of their families, and this murder kind of draws the three characters into the story. And it quite possibly has the best ensemble cast I've ever seen. Sean Penn won Best Actor for this, and this is one of the best performances yet, ladies and gentlemen. And Tim Robbins won Best Supporting Actor for this. And of course the actresses, Laura Linney is in it, and just the acting for everyone is just fantastic in this film. And this movie was also the beginning of Clint Eastwood's directing excellence over the 2000s, because he made a lot of great movies after this too. And it's a very intense and dark and well-written drama, and it's one of the best of the decade. If I had to choose a single best movie of the decade, I'd have to go ahead and cheat and choose the Lord of the Rings trilogy as a whole, because the Lord of the Rings trilogy was the best movie event of the 2000s. For decades and decades, readers of John Tolkien's beloved epic fantasy trilogy, they thought that a cinema adaptation would be next to impossible just because of the epic scope of the story, the length of it, and just the magic and the locations and all these people involved in huge battles. It's just, they thought it was impossible, but that's one of the many awesome things about the 2000s decade for cinema, was for the first time the world really had just the incredible technology necessary for some amazing storytelling that would not have been possible before, The Lord of the Rings being a great example. Peter Jackson filmed the trilogy back-to-back in the breathtaking wilds of New Zealand. And I've always been passionate about storytelling, but The Lord of the Rings really had an effect on me, and it really amplified my love for storytelling. It's one of the primary causes of my love for epic fantasy, and I really think it's one of the best stories yet to be told. Of course, the whole cast was great, truly, but I thought Ian McKellen was a spot-on Gandalf. Like, he was just perfect as Gandalf. The voice and just his mannerisms, everything was great. And Howard Shore, let's not forget, his soundtrack was perfect for The Lord of the Rings. He really captured just the anxiety and despair and evil and love and fun and just the adventure of the story. There's so much to say about this. Like, I hardly even know what to say. Just, it's one of the best stories yet to be told. The Lord of the Rings trilogy was the best movie event of the 2000s. And if you somehow have not read or seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy, do one or both as soon as you can. You have to experience this story. It's incredible. Like I said in the Mystic River bit, Clint Eastwood was rather brilliant in the 2000s, and Million Dollar Baby is one of his best films. It's also easily one of the saddest movies I've ever seen, and that's saying a lot. It's a beautiful drama about several broken lives that are brought together. Clint Eastwood's character, Frankie Dunn, he's a grouchy old man that doesn't let people into his life, and he has a mysterious relationship with his daughter, and you never really find out about it, which I think is kind of cool in storytelling. And then Hilary Swank, in truly one of the best female performances I've ever seen. She plays Maggie, who is a brilliant boxer that wants Frankie to teach her, even though Frankie doesn't teach girls. And she's very poor, and yet she has that kind of impenetrable optimism that some people in dire circumstances sometimes have. And the story also has that whole philosophical debate about mercy killing and whether that's okay or not. Brokeback Mountain was one of the more controversial movies of the decade, but it's also one of the best ones. It's the story of two cowboys in the 1960s who work in the mountains herding sheep over the summer, and they meet each other there, and they fall in love, and they begin a secret homosexual love affair. And after that, they go on to get married to women and have children. You know, they have families of their own, but every now and again they'll go back to the ranch, or they'll just see each other, and it's a secret gay love affair. And they knew the entire time about the homophobia of the area. It was very high, and because of that, a lot of very tragic things occur. Heath Ledger was in it, and he was one of the best actors of the decade, and this is just a great, notable role for him. And Ang Lee won the Best Director Oscar for this, for the year 2005, and he just made it a very powerful film, and I highly recommend it. The Departed is one of the best gangster films to date. It takes place in Boston, and it's about the conflicts between the Boston police force and a brutal Irish mob in the area. Leo DiCaprio, he plays someone who joins the mob, but who's also secretly an informant for the police. And Matt Damon plays someone who is a member of the police, but he's secretly an informant for the mob. So you have two moles that are working in opposite ways. And because of that, the plot is just furious and razor sharp. Jack Nicholson plays Frank Costello, who was the head of the Irish mob, and he was just creepy and he was scary, just a great mob boss. And Martin Scorsese, one of the best filmmakers ever, he finally won his Best Director Oscar for 2006. And The Departed is just a shocking clusterfuck of a mob movie, and it's amazing. Little Miss Sunshine tells the story of a super dysfunctional family on their way from New Mexico to California to enter their daughter into a beauty pageant. The daughter wants to be a beauty queen. The son has taken a vow of silence for a long time, and he's just a very rebellious character. The father is super optimistic, even though he's never successful. The mother is super stressed out a lot, and she smokes and such. The mother's brother is a homosexual who has recently attempted suicide after a failed relationship. And the infamous grandpa is a war veteran who drinks and does hardcore drugs, and he has a very explicit tongue. It's just a super dysfunctional family. And Little Miss Sunshine is also one of the best dramedies I've ever seen, possibly the best. It's very dramatic and serious at times, and it's also hilarious at times. I'll never forget the bit with their van not being able to stop once it gets going because the clutch is broken out, and how their horn messes up and it's always honking, just stuff like that. It's an unforgettable dramedy, and it's one of the best movies of the decade. Children of Men is an intense and stunning dystopian epic. It takes place in a world in which women have been unable to get pregnant for over 18 years. Like, the youngest person in the world is 18 years old at the beginning. And if you were part of the last generation on Earth, would you bother following laws and rules? Of course not. So pure anarchy has broken out all over the world. And Britain is one of the last civilized countries left with order. And they're very harsh on their people. And there ends up being a huge uprising against Britain's government. But Clive Owen plays a character who's very apathetic about life, like a lot of people are. And he gets caught up in the uprising, and he meets a woman who is secretly pregnant. And this changes everything. And he has to get her to safety. And Children of Men also has some of the most impressive choreography and cinematography planning in cinema history. There's like a take that's like 7 minutes long, in which the guy filming the movie, like a shoulder-mounted camera, he follows the actors around like up and down a street, into a bus, and up a building, with explosions going on, gunshots, and it's all one take. It's like 7 minutes long. It's just an incredible movie. It's stunning, brutal, and thrilling. There Will Be Blood is Paul Thomas Anderson's dark masterpiece. It tells the story of Daniel Plainview, who is an independent Texas oil prospector in the early 1900s, and he finds an unused oil location, and he essentially becomes morally bankrupt as his fortune grows. Like, he gets filthy rich, but he becomes a bastard. His character is essentially a misanthrope, meaning that he hates people in general, and he doesn't trust anyone, has to do everything himself. And Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood, in my opinion, this is the absolute greatest acting performance in movie history. Like, this is better than Marlon Brando in The Godfather. This is better than Anthony Hopkins in The Silence of the Lambs. Like, of course, those are fantastic roles and actors, but this is impossibly good acting in this movie. Of course, Daniel Day-Lewis won the Oscar for this, for Best Actor. But just the things his character says and does are just shocking. And Peter Travers, the Rolling Stone magazine movie critic, he actually rated There Will Be Blood as the #1 best movie of the decade. And I'd have to disagree with him on that, but I can certainly understand that being his opinion, because this is one of the absolute best of the decade. It even has some funny parts too. It's not pure darkness, but it's a very dark drama. It's very original and very interesting and just a stunning piece of cinema. No Country for Old Men takes place in Texas in the year 1980, and the main character, Llewellyn Moss, he's hunting one day when he stumbles upon the aftermath of a drug deal gone wrong. Like, there are trucks of drugs in them, bodies everywhere, and he discovers a briefcase with $2 million in cash in it next to a corpse. And he makes the fateful decision to keep the money. And so now the people involved in both sides of the drug deal are after him and each other. And Llewellyn Moss is pretty badass. Like, he's a war veteran, he's a hunter, he's good with guns. He figures he can fend for himself if need be. But at the same time, he consciously decides to allow his loved ones to be endangered in order for him to keep the money. One of the people after him is Anton Chigurh, played by the phenomenal Javier Bardem, one of my favorite actors. He's essentially a very calm and socially awkward killer with a bad haircut. He's one of the most memorable villains in recent memory. He's just a terrifying and interesting villain. And then Tommy Lee Jones plays the sheriff of the tiny town, and his story arc represents a sheltered mind being very disturbed by the horrible human nature that rolls through the area like a storm. No Country for Old Men is far beyond your average thriller. It's very dark and deep and meaningful, and it's one of the best movies of the decade. Disney Pixar's WALL-E takes place on what is left of Earth hundreds of years from now. There's so much pollution everywhere that human beings have to live in spaceships because the world is just destroyed by the garbage everywhere. And WALL-E is the main character. He's an adorable robot whose function is to take all the trash and just organize it into blocks in his area. And he eventually finds the beginnings of a plant, which are nowhere to be found on Earth. And so a robot that he's romantic with scans the plant and sends a message to a ship. And they both end up on a ship where you see humans for the first time in the movie. And humans are fat, lazy slobs who spend their entire lives in hover chairs, and they have buttons by their fingers and floating screens in front of their faces. WALL-E calls for, of course, less pollution, and it also calls for less of a heavy social dependence on technology nowadays. And of course, WALL-E inspires the people to return to Earth and walk around again and be more social and live healthier lifestyles. WALL-E is also very minimalistic. It doesn't have much dialogue, but it's a very entertaining and delightful Disney Pixar movie. It's got an important message, and it's one of the best of the decade. The Dark Knight is one of the very best superhero films of all time, and it's also one of the very best sequels of all time, because it was so much more than its preceding movie, Batman Begins. Everyone was talking about this film in the summer of 2008, and that's because of Heath Ledger's iconic role as the Joker. Heath Ledger's Joker made this movie an instant classic, and this film was also only the second film to make over $1 billion in the box office, so that's a pretty big deal too. The fact that the Joker is in the story allows for a lot of potential in terms of plot twists and a constantly changing tone, and this movie absolutely delivers in those categories. The Joker is far beyond your average villain. He doesn't simply want to kill the hero physically. He gets inside the hero's head. He turns people against one another. He turns Gotham against Batman. He turns the movie upside down. Some people just want to watch the world burn. And that's why The Dark Knight is one of the best superhero films of all time. Just like all Quentin Tarantino movies, Inglourious Basterds is explosive and bold. Even the genre is bold. It's an alternate history. And Tarantino took this genre and made it into a revenge fantasy masterpiece for the ages. One notable aspect of the movie was that it had really, really long conversation scenes, like 10-minute long conversations with tension slowly but surely building. And then at the end, everyone gets shot and killed in like 10 seconds. Another notable aspect, of course, is Christoph Waltz's remarkable performance as Hans Landa, the SS officer, or the Jew hunter as they call him. Waltz was speaking a total of 4 different languages in this film, and he made Landa into such an iconic villain. The movie is shocking and violent like all Tarantino films, and it is pure golden Tarantino madness. The Hurt Locker belongs among the great war films of all time. It's also the only excellent Middle East war movie, I would say. The Hurt Locker is unique in that it's a very psychological war film, unlike most others. You see many different types of personalities in this war. You see a character who just wants to return home. You see a character who wants to prove himself, but after a near-fatal coincidence, he realizes that nobody would remember him if he died. You see a character who is basically an adrenaline addict and who grows to love the life of war and can't return home. As the opening quote says, war is a drug. The Hurt Locker is one of the most powerfully directed films I have yet to see. Catherine Bigelow became the first woman to win a directing Oscar for this, and there's nothing quite like watching this movie for the first time. It is very, very intense, and it's one of the best war movies yet. Disney Pixar's Up is another instant classic from the 2000s decade. I've seen many, many dramatic films, and yet Up is far and away one of the most emotionally powerful films I've ever seen. A lot of people are brought to tears time and time again by the song montage at the beginning of the film, and this beautiful, really well-directed song montage shows Ellie and Carl growing up together, and you see that Ellie can't get pregnant, and yet the couple remains optimistic anyways. And then Ellie dies, and Carl is old and sad and broken and defeated, and he decides to go on his adventure alone. And yet the quirky Boy Scout Russell is an unknowing accomplice on this adventure. And of course they meet the hilarious, classic Doug, and don't forget Kevin, the female bird. And the plot and the humor of this movie are so phenomenal. And for me, the most powerful scene is not the song montage. For me, the most powerful scene is later in the movie. And I think this is one of the best scenes of cinema of the decade. It's when Carl is alone in his house on Paradise Falls, just like he wanted all along. Everything is broken and messed up, and he realizes that there's nothing to do. So he looks through the My Adventure book, and he sees for the first time, he realizes that Ellie had added things in under Things to Do. She added in photos of them married, photos of them spending their lives together. And at the very end, it says, "Thanks for the adventure, now go have a new one."